So Jim Lemoine is an assistant professor of organization and human resources and a researcher with the Chloe Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness at UB. His research focuses on leadership, ethics, and creativity, and he has been published in the Harvard Business Review and Business Horizons, as well as prestigious academic journals like the Academy of Management Annals and Journal of Applied Psychology. His work also frequently appears in magazines such as Forbes, Inc., Fast Company, and Entrepreneur. He serves as a member of the board of directors for Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, an international organization dedicated to sharing and promoting the servant leadership philosophy. Prior to obtaining his PhD at Georgia Tech, he was an entrepreneur, a consultant, and manager at companies such as AT&T. Welcome, Jim. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Just briefly, because I'm about to turn it right back over to you, as you know. But welcome, everybody. Normally, I would say it's great to see you again, because Leadership Buffalo is always such a fun group. But I can't see any of you, because all I can really see is my shared screen. So I hope you look as attractive as you did way back in January. Maybe a little less of a hangover, but I hope you're doing well in these chaotic times. 2 apologies in advance, just in case. One, what you're about to see for the most part is brand new material that I've never presented before that I put together just for this. So I've never done it before. So forgive me if I get a little bit off track or if I'm running overtime. And second, if I sound a little different or if I have to pause and take a drink, I've got a little bit of a cold. It's not COVID, no symptoms. It's nothing like that. Wrong set of symptoms. My wife is a nurse. But if I sound a little off or have to pause, please forgive me. Now, before we jump into the topic, there was an activity I wanted to do with everybody, but then I realized it wouldn't work virtually. So I thought maybe we can do something else. And fortunately for us, Althea, Caitlin, and Jenna have been voluntold to help us with a brief scene. Yeah, there we go. First, a brief scene. And here's how it's going to work. We're just going to give them 3 or 4 minutes, and they're going to play themselves. They're going to be acting out a conversation that they're having in a coffee shop, like happens all the time. And they're going to be talking about, I don't know, how about the circus? But as they go through this conversation, and it can be anything about the circus they'd like, there are 3 rules that they have to keep in mind that's going to guide their conversation. Rule 1, Althea hates Jenna with the burning passion of 1,000 hells. But she loves Caitlin, and she wants to be on her good side. However, at the same time, Jenna really, really hates Caitlin, but she loves Althea and wants to be on her good side. And then Caitlin, she hates Althea with a burning passion, but she loves Jenna, and she wants to be on her good side. And I briefed them on this right before we started. I think they've got Post-it notes to remind them who they hate and who they love. I figure there's about an 80% likelihood that something will come out of it that will tie in what I'm going to talk about, and a 20% likelihood that it's going to be completely irrelevant, but at least it'll be fun. And either way, are you not entertained? So with that said, ladies, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Oh, God, I hate the circus. I don't know about you, Caitlin. I just hate the circus.
How do you hate the circus? Do you hate fun? The circus there's so many things going on. It's such an exciting place to be.
Yeah, I love it.
Jenna, hold on. I'm talking. Caitlin, I just, I feel so bad for the animals.
Yeah, the poor animals.
I mean, I guess like the animal, like it's not the best situation for them, but I don't know. You don't think that they look like they're having fun? Like I think the circus is a fun place to be.
Well, I like the snacks. I mean, that's always fun. I like the food, and I like watching the acrobats, but
yeah,
good food there. Yeah, sure. Great food.
They really do. Jenna, what's your favorite thing to eat at the circus?
Probably the cotton candy.
Oh, that's a really good one.
Snacks, Jenna.
Jenna, what's your favorite kind of cotton candy?
I think the pink kind. Definitely the cotton candy kind. Yeah.
That's a good kind.
Althea, do you like cotton candy?
I hate cotton candy. So, Caitlin.
Yeah, it's actually
what do you like, Caitlin, at the circus?
I really like caramel corn, but I think that's a good one. Jenna, do you like caramel corn?
I love caramel.
No, you don't? I mean, I guess it's not that good.
Well, yeah, it depends, but I like the animals, but I don't like, sometimes I feel like when they whip the animals, I don't like that part.
Oh, no, yeah, that's not good. That's not, I don't think that's good either.
What's your favorite animal at the circus, Caitlin?
I really like elephants at the circus because they're kind of dopey and they remind me of big dogs.
Okay, yeah, I don't like elephants because they're smelly.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess sometimes they're a little smelly, but I don't know. I mean, they're still kind of fun.
Althea, what kind of animals do you like at the circus?
It's not that I don't like the animals. I just don't like how they treat the animals. So I don't think I want to even comment on that, Jenna.
Oh,
Hmm.
what about the acrobats? Althea, do you like the acrobats?
Yeah, I do like the acrobats, but think about now the COVID. I mean, what are these people trained to do? What are they going to go hang from the ceiling at Starbucks now? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, you don't think that people who are acrobats have more of a background? I think you're kind of underestimating them. Like, I think they probably could find a job like in this market, even though there's COVID.
Caitlin, you're probably
It's really hard to find a job in this market right now.
Caitlin, you're so
Mhm.
smart. I think you're right. That's right.
I mean, you maybe, yeah, you know, you could
Mhm.
be right.
Well,
Is that a natural starting point? That didn't get quite as personal as I was hoping it would, but some of the points I was looking for came across in what you just saw. Think about workplace disagreements. And the first point I want to make is that they often start over really tiny inconsequential things. It could start with something as silly as, do you like the circus? Or what kind of animals do you like? We spend a lot, and I saw a couple of our participants doing this just now. We spend a lot of time trying to think about what our comeback is. We spend more time doing that than we do actually listening to our opponents and trying to understand where they're coming from. My wife and I actually call each other on this because when we're having let's call it a debate. We do this all the time to each other where it's so clear from our responses to one another that we actually weren't listening to the last thing that somebody said. We were just thinking in our heads, okay, how can I get them back? What can I do for a rebuttal here? How we feel about someone often overrides what our response should be. You definitely saw that here. You saw people actually, Caitlin, you kept changing your mind based on who said, oh, I hate that. Well, I guess it's not that bad. And if you think about workplace politics, you probably see that happen a lot too. So how we feel about someone kind of overrides what our response should be sometimes, but the opposite is also true. Even more often, the conflict itself overrides how we feel about them. So there could be someone who has done everything necessary to earn our respect, to earn our friendship, but because they disagree with us on something we see as crucial, all of a sudden they've ratcheted down your friendship list and now you see them as evil and they need to be stopped. And then finally, this creates a nasty spiral, right? Because if you just disagree on one thing, it can destroy a relationship. When the relationship's destroyed, you have more conflicts, which makes the relationship even worse. And this is why so many work relationships are suboptimal. Why there's actually relatively few positive ones if you look across the whole world, because this natural and nasty spiral exists. So that's kind of some background for why we need to talk about this. And I know what you guys are thinking right now is, I'm not the one who needs to be in this webinar. It's the person I'm arguing with who needs to be in this webinar, because obviously you're right and obviously they're wrong. They should be listening to this, not me. You're thinking to yourself probably, well, I'm just a really great and humble person even for coming to this when I'm not the one who really needs it. And great, I applaud your humility and thank you for coming to it. But even if it's not your fault, even if you're 100% right, let me show you something we call the conflict curve. And basically research has shown again and again, there's a myth out there that organizational conflict, that fights, that debates, that arguments at work are always bad. And that's actually not the case. In fact, there's a lot of research that shows the more that you debate about how to do things or what we should do or what the plan should be, the more you have debates like that, actually the higher levels of the team, the individual, the organization tend to perform at. And that would get us kind of to a moderate level of conflict, like what you see in the middle of this slide. The problem though, the trap, the nasty spiral is psychologically, we are all a little bit fragile. So if someone disagrees with our work ideas, we take it personally. And that's why so many work conflicts start out with, I think this is a good idea. Well, I think that's a bad idea. I think your mom was a bad idea, and so on and so forth. Things escalate really really quickly into what we call relationship conflict. So if you think about what conflict at work, there can be task conflict about what we do, how we do it. There can be relationship conflict about your mama. Task conflict is often good in organizations, but too often, especially for the political and moral stuff, that's the point of this webinar, it turns into relationship conflict, which is pretty much always bad at work. You never want to have a situation where people are really using personal attacks against each other, and that includes you, even though I know you're perfect. Now, this is an issue now more than ever. It's coming up more and more, and really part of the reason for it, there's some research behind this, and my own personal beliefs, is because of our hyper-partisan society. even a lot of research says that in the last few decades, whatever your political opinion is, you've moved further in that direction. You're a lot less open to opinions that might differ from your own. And it's not fashionable to back down, right? If you look at the two people in these pictures, and I'm not getting political here, I'll do that later, but I mean, I don't care which one you like and which one you hate, or maybe you love both. I don't know how that would work, actually. Maybe you hate both. I do know how that would work. But either way, I can't imagine Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump standing up at a press conference and saying, well, that other person's right. You know, I just don't see that happening. And let's take that to another level. How often do we say when someone asks us our opinion on something, I don't have enough information to have an informed opinion on this, or you know, I'm considering different perspectives on that situation. What's your? It's not fashionable to do that, and we think, for reasons I'm about to get into, that that's not what leaders do. We feel we have to either like something right away, or we have to get really angry about it. That's our society. Social media exacerbates this. Now, we have a general tendency towards impression management and narcissism. We all do, at least a little bit, lead us to this, but we're not comfortable saying, I don't know. We're not comfortable admitting maybe we might be wrong. And this is especially important for those of us who are in leadership roles. Let me go back in time a little bit. You might remember one of the things I did when we met back in January was I told you about my Google experiment, where I pulled up pictures of the greatest leaders in the world to try to identify who do most people think of as great leaders. And you might remember that these were the four people who popped up: Gandhi, Mandela, Lincoln, and Martin Luther King Jr. Now, there are some other names on the list, so let's try to make this a little bit more diverse gender. Here are some of the other ones that also popped up on the list. Can you imagine? How do you imagine any of these people would respond to a question that they don't know the answer to? Can you imagine them answering something at a press conference or to a reporter, to one of their followers, and saying, I don't know? You know, I think maybe I could imagine Gandhi, Lincoln, Mother Teresa maybe, but I really struggle with the rest of it. We don't think of leaders as the people who back down. We don't think of leaders as the people who don't know the answer. We don't think of the leaders as the people who give in, who compromise. We think of the leaders as the people who are really principled, and they're like, okay, this is it. This is the way it's going to be, my way or the highway, right? And that can be a dangerous assumption. Again, here's some pictures of some more people that are commonly recognized as very charismatic leaders. Excuse me. Malala, Steve Jobs, Jacinda Ardern, if you're not familiar with her, she's the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Condoleezza Rice, Winston Churchill, Barack Obama. Can you imagine one of them saying, I don't have enough information to have an informed opinion on this? I can't. And the reason for that is that we've got in our mind this myth of the charismatic leader, the superhuman leader, the person who's really got all the answers. Because the people we think of as great leaders are known for always not backing down. You know, they're confident. We assume that if we want to be a great leader, we've similarly also got to not back down, that we always need to be right. And this gets in the way. And I know you're still thinking, well, hold on, Jim, that's great for everybody else, but I really am right in my disagreement. So tell me how to persuade them that I'm wrong. We're getting to that. Just be patient with me, please. This is an important point to make. You know, I think a lot of Captain America. You know, I read a lot of Captain America comics when I was a kid, and I can't imagine. He always had the answer. He never backed down. We've got stereotypes in our head of what a leader looks like. In the research world, we call them our implicit leadership theories. And one of the problems with them is that the things that we think a leader looks like are not necessarily the same things that effective leaders do. And we think leaders never back down. They never give in. They never say, I don't know the answer to this. And that's a problem, especially now in COVID when things are more uncertain than ever. So when someone, let's do a little bit of audience participation if you don't mind. Would you mind typing into the chat? Just the first thing that pops to mind. Be honest with everybody. And there'll be lots of things coming up on the chat. So don't feel bad about anybody reading it. Someone disagreed with you at work. Why do you think that happened? What is the reason for that? Why did someone completely contradicted what you believe to be true? Why do you think that happened? What is the first thing that pops to mind? Just whatever it is, really short, type it into the chat. Be honest. I'll tell you that mine would be, they don't know what they're talking about. I am smarter than them. That if I'm gonna be honest with you, that's probably the first thing that pops to mind. I see, okay, now they're coming in. They are jealous of me. They don't like me. They're passive aggressive. Their lifestyle, they've got the wrong lifestyle, and that's just making them completely wrong. They're ill-informed. I'm the expert. They had a different point of view. I didn't explain, oh, I like that one. They didn't explain myself well enough. They have different information than I have. This is great stuff. I paused to think about why. Oh, that's good. Maybe they had different experiences. Okay, so you see the different directions we're going here. Research shows you are much more likely in your head to think to yourself, either they have the wrong information or they're not acting in our best interests than you are to say, maybe I'm wrong. And that's a barrier. Even if you are right, that is a barrier to resolving these conflicts at work. Sorry, there we go. So if the assessment was negative, if whatever you just said, like me, was something that they're wrong, or you know, they're bad, they're not thinking this through all the way, then you, like me, were the victim of an attribution bias. What that means is basically we are psychologically primed to believe we're right. It's in our heads. There's nothing we can do about it. If we think something, at some level in our ids, egos, superegos, we think we're the center of the universe. We think we're probably right. And thus, anyone who disagrees with us is either wrong or evil. And I could easily get back to the hyper-partisan nature of our country right now. You've got this mindset, but here's the problem: your opponent does too. As fervently as you believe you're right, they believe they're right as well, which makes it harder to have that conversation with them. You know this. You can't work together to find the right answer until at least one of you breaks out of that mindset. And here we go. Leadership Buffalo, you call yourself a leader? Well, that responsibility is yours. And I'll dig a little bit more into that in just a bit. But first, let me show you one of my favorite pictures about overconfidence. We tend to be overconfident. There's a lot of research about this. If I ask you how good you are at something, research shows for most things, there's a good chance that you will overinflate your abilities by about 15 to 20%. There are some exceptions. For instance, some people have self-esteem issues and they would be the opposite. But most people, when they're asked how good they can do things in general, how good they can do their job, how good a leader they are, most people tend to overestimate their abilities by just a little bit. When an opinion comes up, we think of it as fact. Interesting fact, creativity is an exception to this. However good you think you are at coming up with creative ideas, that is how good you are. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's kind of the exception to this rule we find again and again in research. And often, public speaking, we're better than we think and not worse. But I'm going off on a tangent here. The point I want to make here is we're always overconfident. That's just part of our human nature. And this is tied to something called the fundamental attribution error. He said, as he put up one of his favorite comics, Calvin and Hobbes, and realized that nobody's going to listen to him for about 15 seconds because they're all going to be busy reading the comic strip. The fundamental attribution error basically says this: when you screw up, you believe it's because of external causes. It's because the game was rigged. It's because the situation was unfair. It's because something happened that nobody expected. When somebody else fails, you believe it's their fault. Oh, well, they just weren't smart enough. They just weren't good enough. Obviously, it was their fault that they failed. All of this ties into the fact that we tend to be a lot more confident in our conclusions than we should be. And we go into, the big point here is we go into discussions about these conflicts with that attitude, that we're absolutely right, that we're generally not humble enough, we're generally not perspective taking enough to figure out, okay, where could they have a point? What am I missing about their point of view? We're usually, especially with the moral and political ones, we're a lot more confident in our opinions than we should be. And I know you're thinking, okay, so I might be wrong. It's possible, but why can't they just admit that they might be wrong too? Why do I have to be the one who admits that I might be wrong? Let me go back to something I said a little bit earlier. You call yourself a leader, then it's your job. Let's talk through this. One of the most important things you can do as a leader is talk to the people who disagree with you. You want to talk to the people who agree with you. You want for them to tell you, wow, great idea. Let's go forward with that. I wish I'd come up with that. Why? We all want that. We want that verification of our ego, right? But the best leaders spend most of their time talking to people who disagree with them, either to persuade them or to learn from something. Think of it like this. If there is a disagreement at work, one of three things is true. Either you're right and they're wrong, which means it's your job to persuade them of the truth. Or maybe they're right and you're wrong, which means you're making a mistake. It's your job to realize it. Or the truth is somewhere in between the two viewpoints, in which case it's your job to get both of you realigned. You see the commonality in all three of these points. If you call yourself a leader, it's your job. It's your job to either learn yourself, help them to learn through persuasion probably, or both. And there's a lot of research on this. The one and only time in this presentation I'll mention servant leadership, which we've already talked about. If you remember my presentation from January, I hope you remember how one of the fundamental aspects of this approach to leadership is the idea of humility. The idea that even though I'm the boss, I may not be the smartest person in the room. Even though I've got the most impressive degree out of everybody in this group, they're going to have some ideas that I don't. And there's a lot of research on empowering leadership, on servant leadership, on humble leadership that all backs this up, that actually, contrary to that charismatic leader myth, the most effective leaders are the ones who talk to the people who disagree with them with the understanding that, okay, maybe, just maybe I could be wrong. Let's talk this through. And just to give one more point about the value of confidence in leadership, just think about this really quick. You don't have to put this in chat or anything. I'm going to put some statements on the screen, and you just think to yourself, on a scale of 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree, how true are these statements about you? I know what it takes to make a group accomplish its task. I'm confident of my ability to influence a group that I lead. I know what it takes to keep a group running smoothly. In general, I'm good at leading my peers. So where would you put yourself on that from a scale of 1 to 7? Tons of research on this. This is something we call leadership self-efficacy. This is actually a set of questions that we use in our research, that I've used in my research. We've done a lot of research on here at the University of Buffalo about how confident you are in your leadership ability. And what we find again and again, if you give yourself a really low score like a 1, if you think you're a bad leader, you're actually probably right. You probably are a bad leader if you think you're that terrible. But if you give yourself a score like a 7, actually that means that you're not listening very much. That means you think you know it all. That means you think you don't need to get other opinions, and you've stopped learning, and that also makes you a bad leader. The best leaders actually score in the middle, more in the 3 to 5 range, we find. It's a curvilinear relationship. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. So, but I know you're not worried about the intelligent people, because now I've made you doubt yourself, and that means that you're intelligent. That's fantastic. Let's talk about dealing with those stupid people, right? How do I talk to people who disagree with me about things like politics or morality? Now, let's get into what you're really here for here. Let me share some of the research with you around this. The first step is going past that intuition and trying to see things from their viewpoint. And I've got what I think is a really good example of this. Have you guys seen this meme before? He asked as if he could expect an answer, which he can't possibly have because this is virtual and all I can see is my shared screen. So I'm going to pretend that you all said, yes, Jim, I've seen that meme. It's popped up on my social media feed. I quite like it. Okay, great. I've seen this for years. It pops up. It seems like pop up once every 6 months. With everything that's been going on in the last couple of months, it's been popping up a little bit more. And I can't speak to you, but I look at this and go, oh, that's nice. You know, I like this. I like what this is saying. Let's make it so that everybody can see. That's really cool. But the more, you know, as this kept popping up, I thought, can we go deeper on this? So let's think of this a different way. Taking a look at this picture you see on your screen right now, what would you say if the man in blue said, well, why does he get 2 boxes and I get none? That's not fair. He gets 2, I get none. What is it? How do you respond to that? Do you say, well, wow, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. That isn't fair. Or do you say, well, he needs them more? You know, I could see myself going either way with that, honestly. Or if the man in red, why does he get 2 boxes? I only get 1. I can just barely see. You know, I just barely got my chin over this fence here. That's not fair. Let me take it to another level. Let me make this really organizationally moral for you. What if the men in blue and red said to you, look, we paid just as much as the man in purple. We worked just as hard as the man in purple. Our outputs were just as good as the man in purple. What has he done to earn more boxes than us? And if you are like most people, because there's been research on these kinds of questions, half of you are saying to yourself, wow, that's actually a really good point. And half of you are saying to yourself, no, that doesn't matter. The guy with the guy in the purple shirt needs it more. And I think they're both valid moral responses. You're just coming at the problem from a different way. And I think there's a lot you can do with this particular example. I wanted to really have some fun with it because one day I was on and now here's where I get political, but don't worry, I'm going to slam both sides equally. One day I was on a website, oh geez, what was it? It was a left-leaning website, okay? It was Slate or the Huffington Post. It was something like that. It was a website that, you know, a progressive website promotes democratic priorities, things like that. And I saw they had their own version of this meme. So you've got the equality and the equity, right? And then they said, this is reality and this is liberation. This is the way it should be. And the reason for this is because one of the things that is most important to you, I'm sorry, scratch that. The one and only thing that's most important to you, if you're a progressive, as far as what is moral, what is politically right, ethics means that we should let everyone see. To do otherwise would be inhumane and uncaring. And this is a solution that lets everybody see this is the way it should be. And if you agree or disagree with that, if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a progressive or a conservative, I don't care. Can you imagine how some people could come to that conclusion? I certainly can. Now, for fun, I went to the Weekly Standard. Now, that is a very right-wing website. So we're talking the opposite of your slates. And I actually found where they also had a version of this meme that I copied and I shared with you. So here's another look at it. You've got equality, equity, and then you've got capitalism. Pay for your tickets, freeloaders. True equality is what they call it. And the logic here was, well, hold on. All these people in the audience paid for their tickets. They went to work, they earned their living, they paid for the right to view this game. Why should these three guys get to watch the game when they didn't pay for it? They're cheating. We're cheating the hard workers. They shouldn't have access to that. So you see, they're coming at morality a different way. And again, whether or not you agree or disagree, can you understand how someone could come to that conclusion and still think of it as right, still think of it as moral? Because if you can, now we're getting to where we can start working with people to persuading them. This is something that I just like to look at every now and then because it reminds me, I'm not going to say which side I'm on, but I could see someone arguing either of these to be moral. I could argue for either of these. Can you? I think you probably could, even if there's one you think is more powerful than others. So those boxes at the bottom, those are based on something called Haidt's moral foundations theory, which I know sounds really, really academic, but it's actually not. If I could point out, a lot of what I'm talking to you about, I should have pulled this out earlier, is based on this book by a professor at NYU. It's called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, by Dr. Jonathan Haidt. I didn't write it. I'm not trying to push it. I don't get any money or anything. I'm just telling you where this came from. And he found through a series of studies that when people are coming to their moral and political opinions that we often have these conflicts about, there are 6 bases basically of why we think something is right or wrong. The first one is care and harm. Does it help more people than it hurts? The second one is authority and subversion. For some people, it's very important that we obey authority figures. People in power. They're there for a reason. Liberty and oppression. Morality. Good politics is personal freedom. I lost it. Loyalty and betrayal. They say being loyal to someone that's inherently moral. So I'm having a little trouble here. Fairness and cheating, and tied into this is a sense of responsibility. Are you getting what you deserve? And then the final one, and this one's a little harder to understand maybe, sanctity, degradation. This would be, some people feel morality is kind of like your body is a temple, for people who feel that using illicit drugs, for instance, is immoral. Well, that's spoiling your body, or prostitution or pornography. You could use this moral angle to get at this. So take a look at those for a second. When you decide what you think is morally or politically right or wrong, which ones of those do you lean on? And maybe it's just one, or maybe it's more than one. Maybe it's all of them. And think about someone you disagree with on something. Here's the real key. Here's the key. What do you think they're leaning on to get to their conclusion? Because once you've identified that, now you know how to really talk to them. A lot of studies have found if you tend to lean to the left politically, if you're more democratic, progressive, that care-harm foundation, that's the one that's most meaningful for you. That trumps all the others. Who does it help versus who does it hurt? That is what is good. That is what is moral. None of the rest of it matters compared to the rest. If you're on the libertarian side, surprise, surprise, that whole liberty oppression with a little bit of fairness cheating, that's what you think is most important, and it trumps all the others. If you're more on the Republican side, if you're more on the conservative side, actually all 6 of these are moderately important. Fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, maybe a little bit more so, but studies find that for Republicans, they're all important, just all of them at lower levels. They're kind of battling with each other. So Republicans come at things from different angles. The key here is if you understand that, you can avoid your blind spots, and you can help other people to be alert for theirs, and you can really know how to talk to people. If you figure out where someone is starting from, you can talk to them about anything. Think about someone who's got a different political or moral opinion than you. Okay, odds are they're coming at it from a different one of these six than you are. So think, okay, well, what would this one come from? One of these six come to it from? What would this one come from? Our gut is to, let's say you're a Democrat, for instance, and like care harm is the only thing in the world that's important to you. And, you know, I can morally argue for that. That's fantastic. Your gut is to find rebuttal points from the care harm perspective, but maybe they're looking at it from the fairness cheating perspective. And if you use care harm points, well, it might work, but only if they see those points the same way you do, that they probably don't. And I hope that's making sense. There's been research that's found that you can actually effectively change people's opinions on really hot button political issues by framing it around the area that's important to them. And I'll give you two examples, one on each side, because I'm trying to be bipartisan here. There's research that shows that you can change someone's mind. Let me make sure I get the pattern right. They moved people from the right to the left on the environment by playing up loyalty. Being loyal to your family, passing the land down, and fairness. Our kids shouldn't have to pay for ours. They were actually able to change people's opinions on global warming. And from which one was that? That was from the right to the left. So from the left to the right, they were able to do it with abortion by actually relying very heavily on the care harm dimension. Now, to be clear, I'm not making an argument here for moral relativism at all. I'm not saying that there is no right or wrong. I personally believe there is. That's deep philosophy, and that's getting a lot more into things than I really want to here. Oops. Oh, sorry. Wait. Sorry, pushed the wrong button. Oh, there we go. I was trying to do something clever with this PowerPoint, and then I just messed it up. I apologize. Some of our greatest thinkers, some people who we've thought of as the most moral individuals in the history of the world, have all said that no, there are absolutely absolute rights and wrongs. If you're having a moral argument with someone, it may well be that you're right and they're wrong. But here's what I'm trying to tell you. Stop hating people who disagree with you, because you'll never convince them that way. You'll never have a working relationship with them. Your psychological mindset is to assume that since they disagree with you on this moral or political issue, they are a bad person, or they are woefully misinformed. They're just watching the wrong news sites. So they're not even worthy of your respect. They can never be convinced. Forget about it. You're never going to move forward that way. You're never going to work with them effectively that way. And if this matters to you, you're never going to persuade them that way. And maybe that does matter, maybe they don't. Here's one of my favorite comic strips on this, and it really sums up the way we tend to handle disagreements in the 21st century really well. It's going to take more than a punch in the face to convince me. And that's something we're thinking about, right? You're not going to convince somebody by attacking them, by calling them wrong. If you want to have a conversation with someone you're having a moral or political conflict with, the best way to do it is to understand where they're coming from. And those six moral bases were one good way to do it. And let me give you another tool for this. And this one's absolutely my favorite. And here's where the professor says, if you only take one thing from my lecture, please take this. Okay, so that's what we're going with now. This is a picture of a guy named Dr. Carl Rogers. He was one of the preeminent psychologists of the 20th century. He was one of the first psychiatrists to really move towards a patient-focused model of care. He had a lot of propositions about people and their minds and their cognitions. And his seventh one was always one of my favorite. It said this: the best vantage point for understanding behavior is from the internal frame of reference of the individual. Let me academicize. I'm a PhD. I get to make up words. Let me make that simpler for you. The best way to understand somebody is to understand their perspective. It's to understand where they're coming from. So here's his advice for solving moral political disagreements. And let me tell you something. I have used this and it works. It doesn't always work because sometimes people won't play ball, but consider these steps. Number one, before you argue a point at all, before you say you're wrong, you first explain your understanding of the other person's position in such a way that the other person is satisfied with what you've said. So you're not saying, well, you've got this stupid argument that X is Y and everybody knows it. No. You're saying, you're trying to put into your own words their argument. And here's the magical thing about this. I've found that maybe half the time when I do this, I find that the disagreement was because I completely misunderstood what they said. Because I'll say it in my own words and they'll be like, that wasn't what I said at all. Here's what I said. Oh, well, I can agree with that. So you do that. First, you explain your understanding of the other person's position in such a way that they'll look at you and say, yep, that's my point. Then you say, okay, here's how much of that I can agree with. Okay, I agree with the first point and the third point, but this thing in the middle, I'm really having trouble with. And then, and only then, do you state your own point of view. And you challenge them to do the exact same thing you just did with your point of view. You see, you want them to state your position. I've used this with students. I've used this with colleagues. And again, it doesn't always work. I've had people go, I don't even want, you know, some people just won't talk to you. Okay, fine, that's their loss. The danger with doing things this way, both for you and for the other person, is that you might find your own mind changed. And some people, their egos, you know, they're really uncomfortable with that. There's some, for every one of us, for myself and for every one of you listening, there's a small little voice, or maybe it's a big voice, I don't know, but there's at least a small voice in the back of your head saying, ooh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to leave the ground open for me to change, for me to admit I'm wrong. And if you're not interested in changing, and this goes for the person you're arguing with as well, if they're not interested in changing, well, I mean, they might as well just put on their blinders and shut out the rest of the world. But if you do that, and you end up hating the rest of the world as a result, you can't blame the world for that. So these 3 steps, you start out, here's how I understand your position in my own words. Did I nail that? Did I say that fairly? And if they say yes, then okay, here's what I agree with, but then here's what I disagree with. And when you're talking about what you disagree with, if your goal is to convince them, you try to frame that from their perspective. If they're really coming at it from a care harm angle, you do your best to do the same thing. If they're really coming at it from an angle of what's fair, or personal responsibility, or personal freedom, personal liberty. I mean, to give you the recent example, you know, everything, I saw a great meme on Facebook. There's a lot of great memes on Facebook. I saw great memes that you can be concerned about COVID and take it really seriously, while also being really concerned our government's overstepping their authority here. You know, that those aren't necessarily contradictory viewpoints, although we tend to treat them as such. I mean, I'll tell you, for me, that perfectly describes me. I think COVID's really scary, and really bad things can happen. I'm worried about people I know who are especially at risk, but I also get a little freaked out. Wow, can the government do that? I mean, like, even if I support that, can the government do that? Being able to see both sides of issues can be really helpful for resolving these. So that's my key slide right there. I love this guy's advice. Again, I've used it. Not everybody will do it with you because they're afraid to change. And at that point, there's not much you can do. But again, if you're the leader, it's your responsibility to at least try. So what are the big takeaways here? What am I trying to leave you with as I've got 3 minutes left? We are all overconfident that we're right. You are, I am, the people you are arguing with are. We are all overconfident. We are all clear in our heads. Well, obviously I'm right. Obviously I'm the good guy. And here's the problem with thinking that way. If you are obviously the good guy, that obviously makes the people you're arguing with the bad guys. And as such, we unjustly demonize people who disagree with us, especially over moral or political issues. We tend to write off people who disagree with us as wrong or evil. I mean, think about that. If you've convinced yourself, and we mostly have, I'm right, I'm moral, I am in the right on this, I'm absolutely right, then logically, the people who disagree with you are absolutely wrong. And if the people who disagree with you are absolutely wrong, why should you even listen to them? That is the chain of thought that your brain goes through, conscious or subconscious. We don't consider how they came to their conclusions. We write them off. This prevents us from communicating with them, understanding them, persuading them. This hurts our team cohesion. This hurts our team potency. This hurts our performance. Research backs this up again and again. You call yourself a leader. You're in Leadership Buffalo. I don't care if they're being difficult. It's your responsibility to try to do something about it. To lead effectively, I said this in the servant leadership talk, you've got to truly listen. And to truly listen, you've got to be willing to consider other people's perspectives. You're not necessarily trying to convince yourself that you're wrong, but you're leaving open the possibility that maybe there's something about their perspective that you've missed. Maybe there's something you've misunderstood. Maybe if you just put their perspective and combine it with yours, you could see where you were both coming from. Maybe the other person is wrong, but they're not quite as wrong as you thought. So you start by imagining how someone could come to the conclusion they did. It's a fun thought experiment. Now, I usually start out with that, like I'll see someone who's just completely disagreeing with me on, let's say, I'm just going to pick something out of thin air, our president. I think of a family member who completely disagrees with me about our president. And I'm not going to say if I'm positive or negative, right? And I think, okay, how could they come to the conclusion they did? And my first thought is always, well, maybe they're insane. And now that's not helpful. I mean, that's the first thought, you know, but how could they get to that? What are they basing that on? What are they basing that opinion on? Which one of those moral priorities are they really leaning on to judge? And when I think about it that way, usually I can figure it out. And if you can figure out what that perspective is, first you consider, well, should that persuade me? Or do I think my own moral foundation kind of trumps that? And can you use that perspective to persuade them? Like I said, there's a lot of research that shows this can be very successful. And if you're debating, I said this at the very beginning and wanted to come back to it because my wife and I, we just did it last night. It was so embarrassing. I got to talk about this and I'm doing it to her. Don't plan your rebuttal while they're talking. Really bad debaters do that. There's a really good video on YouTube. I can't remember what it's called, but it shows how in presidential debates over the last few decades, you can tell when a candidate is actually listening to their opponent versus when they're formulating in their head, okay, this is what my reply will be. Sometimes they say things that don't make any sense based on what their opponent just said, and you can tell they weren't listening, right? So don't be that person. It makes you look dumb. It makes you miss points. If you're debating, don't plan your rebuttal while you're talking. Listen to what they're saying. And that's, you know, I could go on and on about this for like a whole class. There's a semester's worth of research easily, but I think that's the main points that I wanted to share with you. Before I open it up for questions, I did this at the end of the servant leadership talk, and I want to do it one more time here. I have a couple of research requests for you. Just something to think of. This is what I'm about to tell you about the research opportunities to partner with the University of Buffalo and our Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. No cost. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Basically, we're studying certain things and we want to partner with organizations to learn more about them. You get to learn more about your organization and the leadership. We get to take a look at your data and confidentially use it to test our hypotheses. Your company's name will never be mentioned. So here are two projects that we're looking for partners on right now. We've got one study where we're looking to explore what are the characteristics of the people who make the best leaders. You know, is it the people who are really gung-ho and want to be promoted, or is it the ones who are a little reluctant to do it? You know, what can you look for to get the most effective leaders? And there's another study that I'm really excited about. It's pretty timely, where we're exploring what, if anything, keeps minorities from feeling comfortable at work, from speaking up around people of the majority race, maybe people different than they are. What might inadvertently be happening that causes an organization not to tap their true potential. If you're interested, if you think your company would be interested in participating in either of these, again, it's fully confidential and no cost. I would love for you to send me an email. We're looking for partners right now. You'd get a lot of information about your company, just ask you to take a couple of surveys. There's my email address. And that said, Leadership Buffalo, I hope that was what you were looking for. We can open it up for questions if you'd like.
And Jim, this is so important right now because there's so many, I think, difficult conversations that are going on a lot about, you know, whether it's politics or, you know, racial equity, and it's really given me some great tips and tools, and I'm old and I'm still learning from you. So thank you. I want to, the one question we had in the audience was, what are some good tools, if you have some, to help us figure out which of the motivations are most important when you're having a conversation? Like, how do we know that care harm is important to that person, or liberty fairness, so that we can know what direction that we should be taking?
Yeah, first up, I just have to share this. My smartwatch, I'm waving my arms and gesturing so much, it thinks I'm running. Obviously I'm doing too many gestures here. I apologize if that's the.
I get my steps in by going like this. I like
yeah,
that.
it thinks I just got a ton of steps. I've burned 50 calories in the last couple of minutes, apparently. Two things. That's not as easy as it sounds, right? It takes some practice. You know, one thing I'd say, and again, I'm not making any money for this, but this is a fantastic book. The Righteous Mind. It's not written like an academic study. It's in normal people words. It's easy to understand. It's got a lot of anecdotes and good examples. It's by Dr. Jonathan Haidt out of NYU. So it's a good, I really think everybody should read it, because I don't care if you're Democratic or Republican or in the middle, it helps you understand people on all sides. I will tell you that one thing that I thought was really neat about it was that Jonathan Haidt, he is himself very much a left-wing liberal. And he went into the book thinking, well, he actually writes this, are all right-wing people really as stupid as I think they are? And a couple of chapters in, he realizes, no, not at all. They just look at things a lot differently than I do. And I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, I hope you can respect that. And it gave him tools to help. So the book's really helpful. The other thing that I'd say that I've really tried to get into the practice in is just asking a lot of questions. Our gut is to say, you're wrong. Our gut is to say, here's why you're wrong. Our gut is to say, wow, that's like evil, dude. How could you even say that? I've had that with some of my family members, right? That's what we want to say. That's what we're driven to. And this is hard. We've got to stop ourselves and go, wow, that's actually, help me understand that viewpoint. How did you get to that? Where do you see that? And you know, are you focused really on how that's helping people? Are you focused on the fairness of it? What are you really looking at to get at that? So it's really just listen. Which is so hard for us to do. And again, when we think of charismatic leaders, we don't think of listeners, we think of talkers, right? So this goes against our subconscious. It takes practice. It's not easy, but it's first knowing what you're talking about, knowing what to look for. And the book's got some great examples. But the big thing is just try to imagine a world where they're right and you're wrong because you missed something. Ask them questions to try to get at that thing that you're missing. And sometimes there will be times when you ask these questions and you realize, wow, they really are stupid. That doesn't make sense at all. Okay, at least you've confirmed that. There will also be a lot of times where you're like, wow, I don't necessarily agree with them, but I see how they got there. I totally see how they got there. And I have that with my family a lot. And there will also be some times where they're like, where hopefully you'll say, that's an amazing point. I need to rethink my own mindset. And I mean, that's happened to me a couple of times. My positions on a couple of major political issues have changed by engaging in this with people I disagreed with. I meant to persuade them, but I ended up persuading myself. And I'm okay with that. And hopefully you are too. So I can't give you any specific pointers, but that's the two big things. Learn more about it, read the book, and ask a lot of questions.
Jim, this is a question from the audience. It's also a question I was going to ask as well. So I think it was the 3 steps associated with, I think his name was Roger, the 7th principle, don't work. What would the next step be? So, if you ask them to explain their reasoning and they, to clarify, and they still don't really have any points that are making sense, what do you do from there? Just don't talk to them anymore? Or?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes there's no silver bullet, right? I'm not going to tell you that using Dr. Rogers' advice worked all the time. It worked 90% of the time. I mean, I'll give you an example. I had a student group last year who got in the really stupid argument about things that were posted on their group chat. And I'm not as technologically savvy. And I tried to get to the bottom of it. It was like about a picture. And I challenged them to do this. I went over Dr. Rogers' advice, and one group did it. And the person who was representing the other half of the group basically said, this is stupid, I'm not doing it, they're wrong. And at that point I said, okay, if you're too sensitive to go into that, we're not gonna waste our time anymore. I'm splitting up the group. There's gonna be a point penalty for this since you didn't wanna take the steps. Yeah, it's not always gonna work. And then you have to, okay, worst case scenario, what do we do about this? Everything I've said, you've got to convince people it's not just you being humble and saying I could be wrong. You've got to say, they've got to be motivated by the fact that you're saying you might be wrong to say, okay, well, maybe I might be wrong too. And not everybody's willing to do that. So if you get to that point, at some point, you've just got to agree to disagree. There's no silver bullet there. If it's a workplace situation, then, and I've had this occur a couple of times as well. The point is to at least talk to that people and say, look, we may completely disagree on this issue, but let's agree we cannot let this affect our work. We may totally disagree on this, but let's agree on the mission of the organization. Let's agree that we're here to help our team succeed. And sometimes that's all you can do. I know that's not satisfying. I hate to say it, but sometimes that's all you can do.
Well, sometimes that happens with family members too. You can't really get rid of your family, so you kind of have to.
Well, you could be the Cajun who moved to Buffalo. Yeah.
I love it. So this is a statement from someone in the audience. They said that your presentation was excellent, but the comment was you made an interesting comment on the Trump-Pelosi slide, which is I'm not sure how someone could like both Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi. And this is just their personal opinion, but maybe and how he or she looks at things, but they think it's possible that someone could like both of them. You want to comment on that?
Okay, so great example. See, I'm like, how do you even, but okay, I am honestly interested in that. And if if Craig wanted to have a chat sometime, over a cup of coffee or something, I'd love to hear how we got there. But okay, yeah. So see, I made an assumption there during the presentation that not everybody in the audience agreed with. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I don't have anything to say about that. Then okay. You know, maybe if you look at it from the, okay, I'm trying to perspective take, right? I honestly believe that both of them are very firm in their beliefs and are working really hard to enact their beliefs, even though those beliefs are in two different directions. Could people respect them just for the firmness of their convictions? Yeah, I could see that. Okay, so here we go. Lesson learned. Thank you, Craig.
Good, I love it. Let me see if there's any more in here before I, hold on, went too far. I know there's another question in here. So do you have any recommendations on how to handle people who monopolize the conversation and you are not able to participate equally, or when you are the minority on your views or opinions in a group setting? Any recommendation on how to handle that?
Well, that could easily be the topic of another one of these sessions, or again, like a whole semester or a big training course. In brief, this is something you see a lot when you have teams with both extroverts and introverts. Extroverts who love to talk. People like me and Althea, you know, we'll talk your ears off. We don't care if you're listening or not. We enjoy the act. Versus introverts, who the extroverts tend to think are not thinking, or they're dumb because they're not speaking up, but really introverts just want to think it through more in their head before they open their mouth, right? So this is something that happens a lot. And sometimes it's a matter of talking to extroverts. A lot of times it's a matter of the leader taking charge and adding some structure. Being able to cut off the extroverted person, maybe going to the introverts and saying, okay, could you spend a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to throw out an example here. What do you think is wrong with what we're discussing? What are the problems you see with this plan? And note that I didn't make that a closed-ended question. I didn't say, are you okay with this plan? Are you okay with what we're discussing? Because they're just going to say, yeah, it's fine. But what do you see could be an issue that we're missing? Like actually carving time out of the meeting and saying, okay, now we're going to hear from this person. Now we're going to hear from this person. A rule of thumb, one of the best bosses I ever had shared with me a long, long time ago, was that if you exit a meeting, no matter how short, and everybody didn't speak up, you failed as a leader, because you're missing a perspective. You missed something. But in most meetings, everybody doesn't, because you've got those extroverts and your introverts, and some people are guiding the conversation. So it's really important as a leader, you can take time aside. And okay, I want to take a couple of minutes and just hear from this person and make it an open-ended question. Don't let them just say, oh, it's fine, everything's good, we're moving on, because that is what a lot of people will say unless you push them. What do you see that could be a problem? What do you see that we're missing? And then the second one was, I'm sorry, I just pulled up the chat. When you are in a minority on your views, opinions in a group setting, boy, that's tricky too. And again, that could be a whole other one. But a first step is to think about what you've got, what I presented here. Think about how the majority came to this opinion that you think is the wrong one, and using their own points, using their own perspective, whether it's care, harm, fairness, cheating, whatever. Can you twist them a little bit so that you can show your own ones? There's a lot of research that shows people who are in the minority opinions in groups, especially when they're women or minorities, they tend not to speak up. And there's also a lot of research that shows when that happens, the organization suffers, the team suffers. So it's really, the answer to that one is very context dependent. It depends on the culture of the team. It depends on the openness of the leader. It depends on the status of the individual who's disagreeing. I'm happy to talk to you about it offline though, if you want to send me an email.
Thanks, Jim. And I know we have to end, but I just have one more question. This is a question for me, actually. So a lot of times people just decide, well, we're not talking politics. We're not talking systemic racism. We're just not going to talk about it, which I don't find is healthy, because if you don't have those conversations, you're never going to get healthy discussions, and you're never going to maybe persuade somebody to come over to your side or you to their side, and maybe find some more unity in our lives at the moment. So what's your thought on that? Or how do you, if people say, I just want to talk about it, how would you approach that?
Well, you've asked me for my opinion, which everybody has, right? And I don't pretend that my opinion is, well, I do pretend, but I know that my opinion is not any better than anybody else's. But it's kind of context dependent, right? There are some political issues that we can disagree on that really have no bearing on our organizational lives or even our friendships, and it's okay. Then there are some political issues and moral issues that really do have an important bearing, or maybe they're just so important for society that we need to talk about them. Or maybe we feel morally obligated. This is such an issue. If you don't see the right of it, then I need to persuade you. So I just think it's really context dependent. But I agree, especially in today's society. These areas where we disagree, we tend to ignore them. You know, we don't bring them up at the Thanksgiving dinner table, or worse, we stop going to Thanksgiving dinner because I hate these people, right? We let relationships fester. We let relationships be destroyed because we're so convinced we're right and they're wrong, and that makes them evil. So there are, you know, I could argue it's very context dependent. It depends on the situation. There are some things like, I mean, you could certainly argue for issues of racism, systemic racism. If you're in an organization and you see that this issue is here, and you've got colleagues who don't, I don't know if that's something you can just sweep under the rug, right? And hopefully you'd feel strongly about that. You'd see it as a moral responsibility. But I am of the belief that we need to get to a point where we can respect our differences and we can understand our differences. And the research shows when we do that, we're more likely actually to get to common ground in the middle.
Thank you, Jim. You know, and this is so important right now because there's so many conflicting thoughts and opinions on so many things right now, especially in the political environment and also in the racial equity conversation. So I think this gave a lot of people some wonderful tips on how to navigate those relationships. And we've had so many town halls and discussions on things. And I think this has really given everybody kind of some tools on how to move forward with some of the knowledge of the things that they've learned in the past couple of weeks. So thank you. You're, as I said, always one of Leadership Buffalo's fans' favorites. And yesterday I had one of my current class members who met you at the retreat, and her company has brought you in and you've been working with them on one of your research projects. So they just love working with you. So I'm just going to give a little shout out if anybody's interested. Again, it's free. It really helps his research and helps your organizations as well. So Jim, thank you. We may bring it back for another round of something. So stay tuned. And Molly, thank you. We love our relationship we have with Chloe. We'll hope you all stay well and stay safe and wear your masks and follow the rules, and we'll get out of this, okay? Because we're Buffalo strong. Thanks, folks. Have a wonderful weekend.
Good to be with everybody. Thank you.
LB team, stay on.